We're going to continue our study in Judges today, and as we look at this, mindful of that repeating pattern that we see over and over again, and mindful of the fact that God uses normal people to do extraordinary things, and normal people are just that. They're normal people. Sometimes they fail. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they fail. God's plan never fails, but people sometimes don't do what we're supposed to do. And sometimes even those who are great wind up failing later. In 2001, Jim Collins wrote a now famous management book called Good to Great. And in that book, talking about good to great, he talks about different companies and things that made them go from a good company to a great company. Two of the companies he talks about in that book are Fannie Mae and Circuit City. They don't even exist anymore. In 2001, they're in a management book called Good to Great. They're listed as great companies. In 2023, they don't even exist anymore. Just because a company succeeds at one point doesn't mean it will continue to succeed. If you look at all the companies that were on the stock exchange in 1900 and take the same look at those that were on the stock exchange in 2000, I think they said 3 companies is all that existed from one to the other. Companies that are great don't always stay great. Things that are great don't always stay great. And this applies to everything. It applies to our walk in life, right? It applies to our walk with God. Sometimes things are going great. Sometimes they're not. It's by the grace of God that we have the relationship with Him that we do today. It's His gift to us that we're able to have that relationship with us because He's always calling to us. But it's up to us to continue to walk in that path, to follow that way, to follow the way He leads. We go stronger as we follow Him. We get weaker as we follow self. Gideon started off as a fearful and timid man. It doesn't mean he's not a good man, right? He's threshing wheat. He's trying to feed his family. He's trying to do what's right. He starts off as a fearful and timid man. Doesn't mean he's not a good man. But God's going to lead him to be a great man. But then Gideon is still just a man. Even though he leads to greatness, he's still just a man. God came to him and He helped him overcome his fear. He was afraid. That's why he was hiding there threshing wheat. God came to him and helped him overcome his disappointment. Remember, he's like, what happened to the God that used to do great things around here, right? What happened to walking across dry land when we came across the river? Where is that? God helped him overcome that. God used him as a mighty warrior. You remember that? The angel appeared to him and says, mighty warrior? And he said, who are you talking to? God used him as a mighty warrior to deliver Israel. Gideon moved from good to great by the grace and the strength of God. With God, Gideon conquered the Midianites. He freed the children of Israel from their oppressors. Gideon is even mentioned in Hebrews 11. Remember, Hebrews 11 mentions those heroes of faith. He's got a footnote, right? He doesn't have a sentence about him. He doesn't have a chapter about him. He doesn't have a paragraph. But he's listed. He's one of those listed. That puts him in a pretty select few. He's one of those heroes of faith. He did great things. And if the story ended after that battle that we talked about last week, if the story only ended there, you watch a movie sometimes the movie goes too long, right? You like the movie and it's good, and by the end of the movie you go, well, I didn't like that guy anyway. If the story ended right there with the Battle of Midian, we'd go, my goodness. We would see Gideon in a totally different light. He might not have just had his name in Hebrews 11. He might have had a story about him there. But that's not the case. Gideon's a man. Gideon will make mistakes. Gideon does make mistakes. Gideon's just like us, and his past successes don't necessarily mean that he will always be successful. His past greatness, doesn't mean he will always be great. It doesn't guarantee greatness forever and ever. Greatness without vigilance quite often will equal failure. And we'll see that as we look into Gideon. Judges 8 tells the final state of Gideon and the children of Israel after this great buildup we've had in Judges 6 and 7. Judges 8 ends that story of Gideon. And it's the movie that goes too long. Go, oh, that's not what I had envisioned for him. That's not what I had hoped for him. I didn't want him to turn out to be just like me and fail at times. I wanted him to keep being strong. But we hear the rest of the story. We hear God's deliverance from the Midianites, but unfortunately, it's going to end with sin. It's going to end with a stain on Gideon's legacy. Turn with me, if you would. We're going to pick it up in Judges 8, starting in verse 4. We're going to pick up the story after that initial battle. Remember, we saw the battle, and we saw God take that army of Gideon's from 32,000 down to 300 men. And they surrounded the camp, and they blew their horns, and they smashed their jars, and they held their torches, and the people in the camp fell on each other's sword. And God routed that 120,000 men with his 300. Picking up the story then right after that, Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted, yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. He said to the men of Sukkoth, "Give my troops some bread. They are worn out, and I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the officials of Sukkoth said, "Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops?" Then Gideon replied, "Just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars." From there he went to Peniel, and he made the same request to them, but they answered as the men of Sukkoth had answered. So he said to the men of Peniel, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Kakor with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. Gideon went up by the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jogabah and attacked the unsuspecting army. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two kings of Midian, fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army. Gideon, son of Joash, then returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He caught a young man of Sukkoth and questioned him. And the young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 officials of Sukkoth, the elders of the town. Then Gideon came and said to the men of Sukkoth, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, 'Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give you bread to your exhausted men?' He took the elders of the town and taught the men of Sukkoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He also pulled down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the town." That's an interesting part of the story. That part of the story doesn't wind up on the felt board when you're this tall. Okay? It's an interesting part of the story. We see Gideon driven here, but he's not being driven here by God. He's not being driven here for the glory of God. He's being driven here by his own passions, his anger, his rage. He's mad. You know, God did a miracle for Gideon when he routed the enemy with 300 men. That's a God thing, right? 300 men, 120,000 dead. Same 300 men travel east, cross the Jordan River, go to one city, go to another city, go up a pass, come down on the army of 15,000, rout them, and capture their kings. Same 300 guys. That's a God thing, right? That's not a Gideon thing. That's a God thing. God did a miracle for Gideon and with Gideon, and they capture this Zebah and Zalmunna, on the east side of the Jordan there. He stopped at these two different towns on his way, these two different Succoth and Peniel, to ask for bread for his men. They're hungry. They're tired. They had a battle. They're in pursuit. They're about to face another battle. He stops and asks for help. They refuse him. Refuse me? You know what I just did? Refuse my army? You know what we just did? Do you know what we're still doing and you're going to refuse us? Both towns gave him the same reason. Did you capture those kings yet? No? Well, then we're not going to help you. They're not going to help him. Judges 6 and 8, they say, Judges 8 and 6 says, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? His answer is no, I'm chasing them. Succoth and Peniel are rightfully afraid of the Midianites. They are rightfully afraid of the Midianites. They should be. Guess what side of the Jordan they're on? They're on the east side of the Jordan. They're on the wrong side of the river, right? When we read about this army, this oppressing army of the Midianites, back in Judges 6 and 3, it says the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people. People from that side of the river came across the river, invaded Israel, destroyed their crops, consumed everything, were so huge that they couldn't even be numbered. Guess where they come from? The east. Now, Gideon has chased what's left of this remnant army, 15,000. He's chased them across the Jordan. They're on the east side. He stops at friendly towns to him, people that should support him. And he goes, give me bread. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. They're not going to help him. They're terrified of being dragged into this war, right? They're terrified of this. They're scared of being punished for aiding the enemy. Either side. We don't read of them helping those 15,000 men. We don't read of them helping these 300. They're like Switzerland. Oh, it's a bad war over here. I don't see it, right? They're not involved. They are terrified of being on the wrong side of the river when Gideon goes back if he fails. What if they feed him? What if they aid him? What will the enemy do to them if they aid the enemy's enemy? They're scared. And you know what? It's a rightful fear. They didn't see the battle that just happened. They didn't see 300 men rout 120,000. They didn't see that. They are rightfully scared to get involved, but that doesn't seem to matter to Gideon. He's angry at them for their unwillingness to help. Angry at them. Now, he's got no patience with them. Of all people, and at this moment in his life, wouldn't you think Gideon would have extra patience for people? Wouldn't you think so? I mean, wasn't it Gideon himself that was scared and didn't think this could be done? Wasn't Gideon himself who challenged God? Who asked God for proof? If you are who you say you are, do this. If you can do what you say you do this. Because he was afraid. He was afraid to go cut down the Asherah pole, right? He was afraid to do that back in chapter 6. He was afraid to go break down the altar for Baal because he would be killed. He was afraid, so God gave him a sign. Now here he is on the wrong side of the Jordan talking to cities that know the size of the army that came past them once before, right? They understand so many people that they can't be counted, and they're not going to help him. I would love to see in this part of the story where it says, so Gideon prayed for God to give them a sign. Man, isn't that, if you're writing the story, right, that's what you want to write? You're like, man, that's what I want to write there. Gideon prayed to God to give them a sign, but he doesn't. Gideon is a man, and unfortunately he acts like one. He gets mad. He gets angry. Instead, he says to the men of Succoth, just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars. To the men of Peniel, Judges 8 and 9, when I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower. That's the way he responds to them. No patience for their understanding. No time to let them catch up to where he is. No time for them to catch up to the story. Just anger, fury at them. Indeed, on his return from routing the enemies, and he does rout the enemies, and God does complete that conquest of that oppressing force. And when he comes back, Gideon executes his own form of judgment against these people. Judges 8 and 16, he took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. That's torture. He tortures them. It doesn't say to death. It doesn't say he tortured them to death. It's not a huge leap, though. Not when we look at what he did to the other city that said no. Judges 8 and 17, he also pulled down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the town. Just imagine for a minute. Gideon is so mad with the people of Succoth and Peniel that he takes his vengeance on them before he takes his vengeance on the two kings of the Midianites. They're still alive and with him. He takes his vengeance on them before he does that. He's driven by rage. He's driven by vengeance. And guess what? It's vengeance against his own people. Succoth and Peniel, those are cities in the tribe of Gad. This is the first recorded history we have of Israelites fighting Israelites as they've come to their promised land. He's more mad at his own people than he is at the two kings that he has with him. He's mad. He's angry. And he kills them over bread. Didn't feed my guys. So he kills them. So what's missing here? What's missing here? If we read through the whole chapter of 8, what's missing here? You know what's missing? God. God's missing here. You read 6 and 7, we see God, 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 God. God is happening. God is all doing. God is there to lead, to deliver, to convince, to help, to build up strength, to overcome. God, God, God. We get to 8. Now it's Gideon, Gideon, Gideon instead of God, God, God. God is active in 6 and 7, and we don't read in 8 that Gideon looked towards him. We don't read in 8 that the people looked toward him. Gideon has taken things into his own hands. This is what happens when we're driven by vengeance and intolerance and bitterness. We don't consult God. We don't consult anybody else. We just do it our own way. Guilty, right? Don't consult God. Don't consult anybody else. Do it my own way. Guilty. Been there. Done that. And if my story continues, probably going to do it again because I'm not smart. Gideon doesn't consult God. Doesn't consult God. Unfortunately, it's not always who you are, but who you become that taints your legacy. And as we continue to look at the legacy of Gideon, it's not what we thought it was going to be when we read 6 and 7. It's not the legacy based on the success that was had. Does anybody here know the name Leon Lett? I kind of like that name, Leon Lett. It just kind of sounds right. Leon Lett. I liked, let me use the past tense, liked Leon Lett. If you're a Dallas Cowboy fan, you probably know Leon Lett. Leon Lett played with the Cowboys from 1991 to 2000, won 3 Super Bowls with the Cowboys, All-Pro 2 times with the Cowboys, was a defensive tackle on one of the greatest defensive lines the NFL has ever seen. Leon Lett. Powerful, huge guy. Unfortunately for Cowboys fans, we don't remember that part of Leon Lett. What we remember of Leon Lett is in the Super Bowl 27 against the Bills. Cowboys are destroying them, blowing them up. It's a runaway game. If you're not a Cowboys fan, you've already quit watching it. Even the commercials aren't good enough to keep you around, right? It is a runaway game. In this game, there's a fumble. Leon Lett gets it. There's nobody between Leon Lett and the end zone. Nobody. Defensive tackle, when they get to score, that's a pretty rare thing. They celebrate for about 7 weeks, right? Leon Lett's not only about to score, he's going to score in the Super Bowl with nobody in opposing jersey anywhere near to him. He scoops up the ball. Rumbling, bumbling, stumbling. That's the way we hear it on ESPN. He's rumbling, bumbling, stumbling, and as he gets to the end zone, he slows down and he does like this. Don Beebe's a name that Cowboys fans know. Don Beebe's wearing the wrong jersey. He's a Bills. Don Beebe never gave up on the play. Not even in the screen, Beebe comes racing in, and the second before Leon Lett steps into the end zone, Beebe hits the ball out of his hands. It bounces to the ground. It rolls out the back of the end zone. It's a touchback, not a touchdown. ESPN will rank that play as the biggest bonehead play in the history of the NFL. It didn't cost us a victory. We won the Super Bowl. But that blunder prevented the Cowboys from breaking the record of scoring the most points in the history of the Super Bowl. Leon Lett, 3-time Super Bowl winner, 2-time All-Pro, one of the best defensive tackles to ever play the game. Leon Lett's the way Cowboys fans say his name, right? It's how you end, not necessarily how you begin. It's what the final state is of the legacy that you leave behind. Gideon followed God and did great things, but how he acts after those great things will impact his legacy. Who he is, how he's viewed. Gideon acts in a way different than the way God treated him in 6 and 7. God is patient. God is kind. God is gracious to Gideon. He's slow to anger. When Gideon tested him one time, God proved it. When he tested him a second time, God proved it. When he tested him a third time, God didn't go, quit. God proved it again. God is patient and kind and slow to anger. Numbers 14 and 18 says, the Lord is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgressions. Exodus 34 and 6 says, then the Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness and truth. These are scriptures that Gideon had available to him at this time. He has personally experienced God's patience up close and personal. Tested God on 3 times, and God is patient with him. God's been patient with him in each situation. In Gideon's first test, after God's been patient with him, he has no patience for somebody that tells him no. He has no patience for somebody that irritates him. Man, that hits close to home. No patience with somebody that irritates me? Yeah, I got that problem. No patience. God is patient with Gideon. Gideon can't be patient with them. God provides proof to Gideon. Gideon won't provide proof to them. It's a hard thing to look at. Ephesians 4:31 through 32 says, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another. Forgive each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Colossians 3:12 through 14. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in a perfect unity. Gideon has a chance to treat these people with love.
kind of sounds like that's what Gideon did. He was on a roll. He was hungry, tired, in the middle of battle. Everything's going on, and he just leaves God behind.
So Gideon's confidence may have overcome him. And in the heat of the moment, he thinks he is God's chosen warrior, right? And that's possible. That
is true inasmuch as what she said is correct, because as these events unfold, they're unfolding fast, very fast. And most times there's not a lot of time to go back and assess, what have I done right, what have I done wrong? Where am I heading? Because you're just rolling with the wave. And it's impossible sometimes to predict, where am I headed? What am I doing wrong? So that's where you have to lean.
hard to see where we're going. Hard to see what I'm doing wrong. He said because of the speed these things are happening. And it's happening fast, right? Gideon's not walking. Gideon is chasing an army. He's in a hurry. He's in a hurry. Maybe it doesn't cross his mind to be patient with them. Maybe it doesn't cross his mind to say, hey, let's stop for a minute and pray about this. Gideon's headstrong and going. But in his headstrong and going, he forgets something. He forgets something important. He forgets to pause and let God. Would the enemy of God have gotten away if he had paused? No. But in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the moments when I make my bad mistakes too, right? In the heat of the moment, he acts without consulting God. And in the heat of the moment, he treats his kinsman with the same kind of contempt he treats his enemy with. And he takes those next steps. And his legacy is diminished by it. Because now it's not how he started, it's how he finished. But it's not only how he started and how he's finished, it's what you say and what you do. Continue with me as we read the story. We're going to be continuing down in Judges 8, 22 through 27. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And he said, "I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." It was a custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, "We'll be glad to give them." So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Orpha, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Gideon is popular. Gideon's so popular, they want to crown him. They want to make him king. In the heat of the moment, after a glorious victory, they want to crown him king. We do that as people. We get that part. We understand that. George Washington led the army, won the battle, came and surrendered his sword to Congress because people wanted to make him king. We're trying to get rid of King George. They want to make a king here. George Washington said, "I'm not having that." They want to make Gideon king. "You slew our enemy. You freed us. You. Anybody hear God in the yous? You. They want to make him king. They want him to rule over them. They even suggest not only you be our king, but set up a dynasty. You and your son and your grandson will rule over us. That's something not done in Israel at this point. And in fact, that's something that has only been done with the priesthood in Israel, where God has set up the priesthood. This is not God's plan for His people. He wants to be their Lord, not another person. He wants to be their Lord. But they wanted to give it to Gideon. Now, Gideon refused. And he told them that the Lord is their rightful Lord. He did refuse. And then he asked for a share of the plunder. Why did God tell his people they didn't want a king? One reason, because they'll tax you. They'll take what's yours. Gideon puts a tax on them. Gideon collects 43 pounds of gold from them. And out of it he makes an ephod. That's a strange word, right? Ephod? We don't hear that word a lot. I don't have an ephod in my closet. You know, there's not a lot of ephods running around in Shallowater, I bet. He makes an ephod out of it. And the last time we read about an ephod, it was in Exodus 28. It was when God had one crafted for his high priest, Aaron. The only Old Testament reference up to this point is the ephod in Exodus 28. Let's pick that up in verse 1 of Exodus 28. Have Aaron your brother brought to you from among the Israelites, along with his sons Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, so they may serve me as priest. Fathers and sons, right? So that they may serve me as priest. Make sacred garments for your brother Aaron to give him dignity and honor. Tell all the skilled workers to whom I have given wisdom in such matters that they are to make garments for Aaron, for his consecration, so that he may serve me as a priest. These are the garments they are to make: a breastpiece, an ephod, a robe, a woven tunic, a turban, and a sash. They are to make these sacred garments for your brother Aaron and his sons, so that they may serve me as priest. Have them use gold and blue, purple and scarlet yarn and fine linen. Make the ephod of gold and blue and purple and scarlet yarn and of fine linen twisted, the work of skilled hands. It is to have 2 shoulder pieces attached to its 2 corners so that it can be fastened. It's skillfully woven waistbands into one piece with the ephod, and make with gold and with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and with finely twisted linen. That sounds like Gideon's ephod we just heard he's going to make. Suspiciously like the one God gave his high priest. Something he's creating for himself to give himself dignity and honor. Whatever's intention Gideon had with that thing, it becomes a snare for the people of Israel and for Gideon himself. They actually worship the ephod. Gideon, the mighty warrior. Gideon, Jerubbaal. Remember, he's called Jerubbaal because he tore down the idols. Gideon, Jerubbaal, tears down his father's idol and now builds an idol that his people worship. They're back to square one. Where you start is not what's important, it's how you finish. When all of this is done, when all is said, whenever it's read, when all is written down, the reality is that God is not in the minds of the people of Israel, and worse than that, He's not in their hearts. Their end state is the same as their beginning state. John Piper, the chancellor of Bethlehem College and Seminary, wrote, "What is the deepest root of your joy? What God gives you or what God is to you?" What's the deepest root of your joy? What God gives you or what God is to you? The Israelites, time and time again, as we go through Judges, look at God as a genie in a bottle that'll just take care of their wishes. We don't want the Midianites anymore. Take care of them. Okay, now we still want to do our own thing. Don't bother us, Time and time again, Gideon's greatness ultimately fails because it's not how you start, it's how you finish. The mighty warrior, the one who destroyed the idols, has created an idol. Now they'll have peace for 40 years after this. Judges 8:33, the story ends like all the others we've read so far pretty much. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-Bertha as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of their enemies on every side. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things he had done for them. Man, I wish the ending of this was different. I wish it was better. I wish more for Gideon than this. Gideon is, like I said earlier, one of the heroes of faith mentioned in Hebrews 11. Man, I wish his story had ended different. But I'm thankful that God uses men who make bad mistakes, because I'm one of them. I'm thankful that God puts the whole story in there so we can learn it. His legacy is tainted because he fails to remain vigilant to God and focus on everything. It's a somber reminder for us today, because our legacy that we want to leave behind, it's not who you are, it's who you become. It's not what you say, it's what you do, and it's not how you start, but it's how you finish. And that's what I have for us today. Thank you.